Hi everyone, my name is Guiyu and I am one of the developers of Duckbound, a lighthearted turn-based RPG with real-time OSU-style combat. Over the past 2 weeks, I have received many questions about how we were able to create such a polished product in just 9 days. So I wanted to create a quick video just to break it down for you guys, as well as to provide any workflow related tips for game jams. Hopefully this will help all of you in creating polished games for your future game jams. Before we start, I want to do a quick introduction of our team. We have me, Guiyu, who did all the design, narrative, and the programming. We have Crazy Curries, who did the 3D art. We have Andre the Quiet, who helped with programming through bug fixing and playtesting. And we have Forsaken, who composed all of the music. So let's get into the timeline of Duckbound. So day 1. It was mostly just brainstorming ideas to fit the theme. We had like a 2-hour long call. We just went through a bunch of different ideas and chose the one that we felt fit our strengths of what we can make. So we settled with an RPG. You start with 0, but you unlock a bunch of abilities by interacting with the environment, and you can fight a bunch of different enemies, kind of like Undertale, with your abilities. Then you slowly work your way to the final boss. This was my original pitch, and we started the Unity project and set up the version control with GitHub on the first day. I strongly recommend you do this on the first day in case you run into technical issues, so you want to sort it out as fast as possible, especially if you're working with a team. On day 2, we did more brainstorming and refined our idea. So this is where we decided to scope down to just 4 abilities and 4 enemies so that we could just get the basic loop in and see if it's fun, and if we have time we can expand, but if not, it's okay. And this is where we started setting up the early architecture for the combat. Day 3 is when I really locked in, because honestly the first 2 days was mostly just like brainstorming, and I just spent a lot of time gaming and playing Overwatch instead of working. So on day 3 I locked in. I decided to write the entire game design document for Duckbound. This was where I fleshed out the game's title, the premise, narrative, dialogue, all the characters and their abilities, their personalities, and all the combos, and the gameplay loop. And lastly, I also included a lot of references with art and music from my artists. On this day, Carrie started doing the scene blocking for the pond area and the battle scene. On day 4 is when I decided that I would like to have original music for our game, so I started the composer recruitment process in the Shovel server, and I wrote a very detailed document for recruitment of what I was looking for. I will go into this later. This was also the day that we finalized our visual style, which is the very retro DS aesthetic that you see. It's very important that we finalize this early. I will elaborate later as well. Day 5 is when I fully implemented the modular combat system with ability, and day 6 is where I polished it up and made sure it was fun. So this is the day that I added the quick time because I realized that it made the combat a lot more fun, and Carries was also working on more scene blocking and art alongside. Day 7 is when I fully implemented the progression system, also very modular, and the rich tag system, which I will explain later. Our composer Forsaken also completed all of the music tracks, which is crazy because he basically did every single track in a single day. I don't know how he did it. He is very talented. Day 8, all of the fights and areas were fully implemented, so the full game loop was in, just without polish. This is the day that Andre started test building, and I also recommend to start this very early because sometimes builds don't work or you discover new bugs that aren't in the editor, so it's very important to test build at least a couple days before submission. Day 9 is when all the scenes are completed, like art-wise, fully polished. I also decided to add the combat tutorial because I felt it might be confusing without it. And day 10, which is the final day, I finished polish, so the rest of my team was pretty much done with their work. I was mostly doing some last minute polish and a lot of bug fixing. I think I did at least like 8 hours straight of bug fixing and test building because I wanted to stress test our game as much as possible and look for every single bug I could possibly find and fix it before we submit it. So this is the full timeline, heavily simplified. If you would like a more detailed breakdown of our day-to-day process, please let me know and I will try to put one together for you guys. Let's go into the tips now. So for early stages of the game jam planning, again, all of these tips will be aimed towards how to create a polished product. Start brainstorming early and try not to get stuck on ideas. If an idea isn't working, just drop it. We call this the sunk cost fallacy, when you start to think that you've already spent too much time on an idea and you get attached to it, so you don't want to drop it. This is really dangerous because sometimes an idea isn't working and you need to just move on. In the first 2 days, I will really suggest to just go through different ideas, try to even prototype a few things out, and if something isn't working, you can't find a way to make it work, you don't know how to code it, whatever, just drop it and come up with a new idea. I would say if you are like further in, maybe like halfway through, don't do that because you don't have enough time. But definitely in the first 2 days, don't get attached to any of your ideas. Start small and expand out. Same with what Duckbound did. We started with a lot of enemies and a lot of abilities, but we decided to scope down to 4 abilities and 4 enemies, which we later even scoped down to 3. This was very good because we actually didn't end up having time to implement more, so I'm glad that we did this. Play into your strengths, figure out the strengths of all of your teammates, and play into it. If you know that someone is better at art and they have a specific art style that they are comfortable, lean into that. If someone is good at coding and coding like specific things, lean into that. I'm not telling you guys not to try new things, but just try to consider your strength while you're trying new things. Figure out your game's visual style and experience goal early. Experience goal is basically how you want the player to feel when they're playing your game. So if you want them to feel wholesome, or you want them to feel scared, or you want them to feel frustrated, these are all experience goals. You need to figure that out early and make sure everyone is aligned so that you can design your game to work towards that goal. And figuring out the game's visual style is very important for boosting team morale and also making sure everyone is on the same page. For example, within the first 2 days, I established that we would have a 3D pixel art style. And this was very helpful for Curie's, our 3D modeler, because she could keep in mind that her models don't have to be super detailed because you're not going to see the details with the 3D filter. So it's very good to establish this early on for efficiency. And lastly, have a director/producer figure. Director is basically someone who has like the most unified idea of what the game will be like, and the producer is someone who basically keeps the game on schedule and assigns everyone their tasks. Usually in larger game companies, these are not the same person, but I would say that in game jams, it's okay if they're the same person because usually this one person will lead the rest of the team members. So it's really important to have this if you want to come out with a really, really polished product. So in Duckbound, the director producer was me. Some design tips: make a GDD, game design document, very important for establishing the game's unified direction, making sure everyone's on the same page. I would actually say that a very, very large reason why our composer and our artist were able to create their work so quickly and without having to redo anything is because I gave them both extremely detailed descriptions of what I was looking for in terms of like the art and the music. So at this point, early on, I didn't have any gameplay footage to send them. So the only thing I could send them was reference images and very, very, very detailed descriptions of what I wanted. And I even gave them all music samples that carried the vibe of what I wanted so that they were sort of unified on the vision. This really helped them know what to make. Don't spend too much time on lore. I think a lot of beginner game devs run into this. They really want to make a game with a lot of lore. For a game jam, you just don't have time to implement it because it takes a lot of time to explain your lore to players, and game jam games are just not long enough to do it. Instead, you should focus on having fun gameplay loop so that it feels engaging. Make sure the controls are intuitive. Always assume that the player is not going to really know what you're supposed to do because usually they don't. So choose intuitive controls. For example, most games use WASD for move, they use space for jump, shift to run, and either E, F, or space for interact. Try not to stray from these buttons because players will naturally assume that that is your game's controls. So for example, in Duckbound, we don't put our controls anywhere. We don't put it in the description. We don't tutorialize it in the game. Not because we shouldn't, but because we didn't need to. Because for interact, I chose to do space, which is a very intuitive key. So most players knew to try pressing space to interact, even though I didn't tell them. So you can see that choosing intuitive controls is really helpful and also saves resources on tutorialization. Every game design choice should feel intentional. Let me show some examples from Duckbound. We didn't spend any resources to make a sprint animation or sprint functionality because our game doesn't need a sprint. Or the pond area doesn't use a follow cam. If I only have follow cam in all the other areas, those areas feel bigger than they are, and then the pond doesn't feel as big because a player doesn't really spend that much time there, so they don't really need to feel like the area is large and explorable. It was a very intentional choice. And for game interactions, like for example, when I was designing the characters, I wanted all of them to have different attributes. For example, Sir Gaspalat is like a shelled ground enemy, Vivi is a flying enemy, Blorbo is like a jelly type enemy. And then I sort of designed their personalities and general design based off of that because I want all of them to feel unique. The thing is, creating characters for your game is kind of time consuming. So if you're going to do it, you want to make sure each of them stand out and really have a purpose in your game. For writing, it's important not to have filler dialogue, and if you're not sure if something is filler, you just need to ask yourself, am I bored reading my own dialogue? If the answer is yes, you probably have filler. And lastly, play a lot of games and pull inspirations. That's not a bad thing at all. I strongly encourage it. Duckbound is a huge mishmash of many different games such as Animal Crossing, Osu, Pokemon, Undertale, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, and so on. You know, it's so many genres combined, and I think it's a great thing. Okay, for programming, so this section is going to be a bit technical, so if anything is hard to understand, you can just skip it. Focus on making things modular and scalable. Basically, code it in such a way that you can add things or change things really easily without having to change the code too much. Draw a balance between setting up good code architecture and just getting things done. So let me give you guys good examples of good code architecture. I built a very, very highly expandable ability system. I basically had an ability database that stores every single ability as a scriptable object in Unity. A scriptable object is basically like an asset that you can edit in the editor without having to touch the code. So I have a database that stores every single ability, and whenever I want to create a new ability, whether it's for the player or for an enemy, all I have to do is just add it to the database. I had a variable that let me choose who it's for, and then the code will automatically assign it to the correct character. So for example, if I wanted to give Sir Gaspalat a new move, all I have to do is create a new ability, put it in the database, and automatically the next time I play the game, Sir Gaspalat is going to start using that new ability. It's very simple and very easy to add new abilities and new characters, which was super good for later iteration. I made a very modular progression system. I have different types of steps that have different completion requirements. So for example, one step would be like interact with 3 items to complete, or you have another step that's like win the battle to complete. And each step also has a description that displays in the top right as your objective. So when I want to add a new progression step, all I have to do is add it to the list of steps, and I never have to change the code. It's very easy to add steps and also very good long-term investment. Rich text tags are very useful for dialogue. They're basically little tags you can put in your dialogue to trigger different kinds of events. For example, you can put a text effect tag to make the text change. Like it can be wavy, it can be bouncy. You can do like a sound effect trigger to play a sound effect at a specific line. And the one that I used it the most is the speaker tags, which show a portrait of who's speaking. So all I have to do to show the portrait of the correct character who's talking in the dialogue box is to write speaker equals Vivi, for example, and it will automatically display Vivi's portrait. So this was very, very easy to work with. Anyone on the team can edit the dialogue, even if they don't know how to code. So those are examples of good architecture. And for things that's just get it done, singletons, totally okay to use in game jams. If you don't know what it is, I won't explain what it is. It's kind of hard to explain. But if you do know what a singleton is, you have probably heard people say not to use it. And yes, if you're working on a larger game, probably not. But game jams, it's totally okay because your goal is to just make things fast. Other things are okay. It's okay to hard code some things if you don't need to make it scalable. It's really just something you have to figure out, like what should be architected well and what just needs to be done. The best way to figure it out is whether or not something is going to have a long-term investment. If it is going to be a long-term investment, like the combat system or the progression system, architect it well. If not, just get it done. Consider making things easy for other members of your team. For example, I made a VFX editor tool which was very good for helping Carice with her workflow. An editor tool is basically code that I make for members of the team. So it's not for the game at all, it's just to help other team members. So the tool I made is to basically adjust the VFX all in one place so that Carice can really quickly and easily like edit stuff around and test stuff with her models without having to go to various different scripts or objects. Very useful time investment that I made because I had to spend time to code this, but it paid off. I also made a couple other editor tools such as Scene Switcher, and those are all like very useful in the long run. Know when to use external packages. So a package that we did use is Unity's character controller package and follow camera, so we don't have to code our own. But a package I didn't use, I tried to use the text effect package that I found online, but I couldn't figure it out because there were a lot of things I didn't understand. So instead of trying to force it, I just dropped it and coded my own text effects using coroutines. So this plays into my strength because I am a pretty skilled coder, so it was actually faster for me to do that. But if you are not a skilled coder, maybe it might be easier for you to use the text package. So you need to figure out what your strength is and play into that. Bug fix often and early, and test build often and early. You will keep running into bugs, and you just need to keep making sure that your game works at every stage because sometimes things will break. Unit testing is kind of hard to explain, but essentially it's like testing different parts of your code without having to run through the entire game. So imagine if every time I want to test Blorbo's combat, I have to play through the entire game over and over. That would take up so much time. So you have to code your game in a way that you can test specific parts really easily without affecting other parts. I know this is kind of hard to do, but it's really useful, so try to do it if you can. And lastly, spend at least some time on optimization. Optimization tends to be overlooked in game jams, but sometimes lag spikes can be really annoying for the player. So if you have time, I would suggest looking into it. Most game engines have a built-in profiling tool that you can use, and the general areas that tend to lag are scene loading and spawning a bunch of objects, and I guess like places where you have a lot of particles. So watch out for those areas. Okay, for art. Use an art style you are comfortable with. So the largest reason why our game has that 3D Animal Crossing art style is because that's the art style that Carice is the most comfortable with. So we decided to go with it. Use free assets for UI and set dressing as much as you can because you want to save your time and art for important things that need to stand out. For example, our game has a lot of shrubbery, and those are all free assets because I don't want Carice to spend her time modeling those. Instead, I want her to spend her time modeling like the characters because those should look unique. Focus on the color palette, lighting, post-processing, and solid visual style. This will carry your game a long way. Our visual style, which is like the retro style, is a mix of a 3D pixel filter, an 8-bit dither filter, and a toon shader, and this really carried our game aesthetic. And for models, just remember readability is the most important thing. Focus heavily on polish and juice. Basically refers to like all like the text bouncing or the UI bouncing, sound effects, particles, all of these like sort of special effects that make the game feel more alive and making your game feel polished and professional. And I would actually argue it's more important than the actual art itself. So please don't neglect that. Reuse resources as much as you can. Be smart about unique assets. For our game, universal gradient texture is shared across all the models, making it easy to make a bunch of color variants. All the characters' faces are mapped in a way we can change the faces really easily. And many of our characters use the exact same rigs, so we can reuse animations across models, which is so useful. Keep these in mind if you are making 3D models. Lastly, figure out what you actually need to spend art on. For example, our game doesn't actually have that many animations, but the lack of animations is substituted with really good game feel and blinking. 2 days before the deadline, I asked Carice to create blinking animations for every single character, which is not hard to implement with her system, but it adds so much life to the characters without needing to create new animations. So this is a really good investment and I highly recommend. As for music, I'm not going to go into a deep breakdown because a lot of it is just knowing your tools, working quickly. There aren't really any shortcuts when it comes to music, and a lot of it is just experience. If you are recruiting artists and composers, make sure you give them a really good breakdown of what to expect. your game concept, what you want. Show them any gameplay footage or screenshots from your actual game if you can. Give any references and inspirations of what you're looking for. When I recruited our composer, I gave him a very, very detailed description of what I wanted, how many tracks, every single character in every single area, since those are the tracks I wanted. And I also gave him 2 music tracks from games that I wanted the track to sound like, so that he would have something to listen to and know like what kind of sound I was going for. So even though I honestly don't know much about music and I couldn't really describe it in technical terms, I was able to communicate my vision to him. And it worked out really well because our music is awesome. That's gonna be the end of this video. If you have any questions at all, feel free to ask me. For example, with game feel or polish, I didn't go into too much depth of how to do it. So if you have questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out, because I really want this resource to help you guys in making polished game jam games, especially since I know a lot of you are going to be doing other game jams. So I hope this helps you. And I wanted to say a last thank you to everyone who loved Duckbound. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching.